Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Wake up, we're here. It's so much worse than we feared. There's nothing left here. Our country has disappeared. With the winter trees bleeding, leave red blood. Summer sweet dreaming, April blush, but none of that is ever gonna mean as much to me again. Hold out your hand. There's so much you don't understand. Stick as close as you can. All of our best laid plans. You got the white clouds hanging so high above you. You got the helicopters dangling, angling to shoot the shots to feed the hungry weekend news crew. So every evening we can watch from above crushed cities like a bug, fold ourselves into each other's guts, turn our faces up to the sun. I won't take no. I won't let you go. All by yourself. I know you need my help. When the cold light shakes you like a chandelier, and the snowflakes break through atmosphere and melt on the blue breath of the auctioneer, disappear. So every evening we can watch from above crushed cities like on every humble seed. No tender act of mercy escapes his watchful eye. For there is one who loves me. His hand is over mine. In the kingdom of the heavens, no suffering is unknown. Each tear that falls is holy. Each breaking heart a throne. There is a song of beauty in every weeping eye. For there is one who loves me. His heart, it breaks with mine. Little things with great love. At the table of our Savior, no mouths will go unfed. His children in the shadows stream in and raise their heads. Oh, give us ears to hear them, and give us eyes to see. For there is one who loves them. I am his hands and feet.
There are many ways we collaborate with each other to be the church we're called to be and to serve how we serve. And our contributing financially is one of the most important of those ways. If you want to help fund and sustain what we get to do together, go to crosspoint.org/contribute to see the many simple ways that you can do so. You can even text crosspointenc to 77977 to receive a link to get started now. Thank you for your partnership in the work we do together.
And probably Probably Jesus' most famous teaching, traditionally known as the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says this: "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" So apparently Jesus is saying that there is something about our eyes, about the way you and I see, that affects our entire life. Yet that statement on its own can easily leave a reader like you and I today wondering, well, that all sounds lofty and poetic and mystical, but what do we think Jesus is actually getting at? So to help with that, let's look at some context, because the thing is, Jesus isn't making up anything new here. He's not introducing a new idea. Rather, he's drawing upon a tradition that the people he would have been talking to would have been extremely familiar with. And I want to make sure that I give credit to Rob Bell and his research, who first introduced me to these many of these ideas several years ago that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I'm just passing on wisdom here that I've learned from someone else, and I just want to make sure to give him credit for that. Now, in the ancient Jewish world that Jesus lived in, referring to someone as having a good eye or a bad eye was a common cultural expression. It was originally rooted in this idea that we find in the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, in a book known as Deuteronomy. So in chapter 15 of Deuteronomy, we read this: "At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release." So, in teaching people how to do life together in the ancient Hebrew world, the idea here was that every 7 years, you must set people free from the debts that they owed you. Every 7 years, there was this built-in reset, a fresh start for the entire community. Now, imagine what that would be like for a moment. It's intriguing, right? But it also comes with a ton of questions. Questions like, well, what about this circumstance? Or what about this situation? What about if this happened? And understandably, it was no different in the ancient world. They had all those same questions. So before going any further, I think it's worth noting that these debts, though, were referring to debts incurred by people trying to meet their basic foundational human dignity type of needs. Shelter, food, water. This wasn't about someone buying the ancient world version of a supercar and getting a 50-year loan for it and getting that debt canceled after 7 years and somehow exploiting a loophole so that they're free and clear. That was never the intent here. Rather, this is about, let's make sure no one gets stuck in a hole that they can't ever climb out of by just trying to have the basics. That spiraling cycle of dehumanizing generational poverty. But still, even when it came to these foundational needs, it naturally raised a lot of, what about when this happens? Or what about when that happens? And what about this circumstance? And so we see a sample of that discussion a little bit further in the same chapter of Deuteronomy. It reads this way: "If there is among you a poor man of your brethren, within any of the gates in your land which the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he needs. Beware lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand. It's close. And your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing. And he cry out to the Lord against you, and it becomes sin among you. You shall surely give to him. And your heart should not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your works, and all to which you put your hand. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor, to your needy in your land. So, here's the basic warning that's being given. Let's say you're bumping right up against the 7th year, right? You're in this community, this ancient Hebrew community. You're bumping right up against the 7th year where all the debts get canceled. And a poor person in your village comes to you and asks you to help meet their basic needs. And when that happens, you're going to be tempted to think, well, the 7th year is almost here. I mean, it's just literally around the corner. So I better hold back and not give him anything, because it's extremely likely that I'm never going to get it back. Because again, the 7-year community reset, it's It's right there. It's going to happen any moment now, maybe just in a few days. And the text says, when you look at your neighbor this way, it's letting your eye be evil. And if you do that, it may cause him to cry out to the Lord against you, and it becomes sin among you. Now again, context here matters, right? For the ancient Jewish people, the idea of crying out to the Lord was built into their DNA of the Exodus story, where the Israelites cried out to God because of their oppression and their slavery under Pharaoh. So whenever we see that idea that they would cry out to the Lord, it echoes back to the story of the Exodus. And so it's this way of saying, well, now that you're out of Egypt, don't let yourself now turn into the oppressor and be the reason that someone can't have their basic needs met. And so it was out of this tradition that this common cultural phrase developed of a bad eye and a good eye. We see it later on in the Hebrew scriptures when the writer of Proverbs puts it this way: he who has a good or a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. Again, the idea that's getting conveyed here is you need to make sure that as far as you're able, that you don't let too big of a gap get created where your neighbor finds themselves steeped in too big of a hole of poverty that there's no reasonable way to get out. Therefore, when you have more than enough and you share with those who have a need, you don't possess an evil eye, you possess a good eye. Because here's the heart behind this whole idea, right? There's two ways of seeing the world. There's a way that you approach the world where you see the world through the lens of scarcity or threat, that you have to cling and protect and keep getting as much as you can because there's never enough. And there's another way that you can approach the world where you see the world through this lens of potential and generosity and contentment and joy. And so going back to the teaching of Jesus that we started with, Jesus, building off this very common tradition at the time, says, what kind of eye you have, what kind of lens you choose to see the world through affects every single part of your life. It either fills you with light or it fills you with darkness. Now, not surprisingly, the primary layer of this has to do with money. This becomes even more obvious when we look at the fuller context of what Jesus is talking about when he says this thing about good and bad eyes. Notice what comes before and after this idea in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and riches. And so this idea that Jesus is talking about is sandwiched in right between this teaching about how we view money. Now, here's the thing. It's not news to any of us that the amount of money we have coming in and going out often has a direct connection about how we feel about how things are going in our life. Many of us can live in this constant state of anxiety, stressed about whether there's enough money coming in or what might happen if enough money doesn't come in the future because there's a certain amount going out, or that's going to need to go out. And there's this constant stress between these two tensions, and it can be terrifying and overwhelming at times. And in no way I want to make light of that because I get that. And I've struggled with the very same thing. And yet I find myself coming back to this idea that somehow, some way, I've made it to this point. And if you're listening to this through all the terrifying and challenging obstacles and seasons, you've made it through as well. Somehow we're here. Somehow those moments of terror in the past didn't completely crush us. Yet still, what we all know is that stress can easily affect every single part of our lives. It can affect every aspect, our whole bodies, our whole being. Now, obviously, hopefully it goes without saying that it's important to practice financial wisdom, to be able to track expenses, to track what's going in and out, making wise adjustments, saving, budgeting, investing, all those things. Absolutely 100%. And to be extra clear, it's important to tighten the belt financially when necessary, being careful and living within or below your means, living simply. All of those can be really good and wise things. You can do all those things and still very much keep your eye and your body full of light. But sometimes, in the midst of navigating our stresses and anxiety about money, one of the things that I think can take over is a type of scarcity mindset, where we let the practice of sound financial wisdom tighten up our hearts at the same time. And we start to see the whole world through a particular kind of lens where what happens is our hearts get cut off. We develop a bad eye, and it affects every aspect of our lives that goes way beyond money. And where, in the words of Jesus, a certain kind of darkness starts to creep in, where we start to see the whole world through this lens of scarcity, that we must protect what we have at all cost. And sometimes we can become so overwhelmed with what we don't have that we lose sight of the extra that we do have, and we refuse to share. And in that process, you and I, we miss out on the joy that comes from helping someone who has a need that we could meet. And that's part of what can strangle our heart and strangle our own joy and our own peace and contentment. And so when you and I choose to live with this bad eye and we see the world through scarcity, it inevitably leads toward hoarding and stockpiling. And then, not surprisingly, we think, well, I've got to find a way to protect what I'm hoarding and stockpiling. And eventually, you and I will have way more than we need, and others won't have enough. You see, how this obviously works on an individual level, right? But it also works on a community level and a national level. Because if we remember from the scriptures, Jesus' ancestors had been slaves in Egypt, and Pharaoh kept storing up and stockpiling all sorts of grain and resources. And what did that lead to? It led to slavery and oppression. Because once you stockpile all those resources, the natural response for anyone is to have to protect them, right? So naturally, what happens next, especially as a community? And you need more guns and you need more tanks and whatever weapon of the time to protect what you've accumulated. You see, this was a story that Jesus' people had deep in their bones, where there was this ever-growing gap of the few who had nearly everything, and the masses were struggling to barely survive, if at all. And to those crowds who had all this historical context, Jesus said, "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness." So what does that mean for you and I today? Now, obviously, it has implications on how we view and approach money, and it should compel us to wrestle with some big questions. And I don't want to simply brush over those, because I really do think that's the main and most important point that Jesus is getting at. And it's the most challenging for us to wrestle with. But I'm assuming each of us can make those connections on our own, and that involves a lot bigger discussion than we can accomplish here in the next few moments. But when we talk about becoming so overwhelmed with what we don't have, that we could lose sight of what we do have and refuse to share, and therefore miss out on the joy that comes from helping someone who has a need that we could meet, certainly that involves money. But I think the point here, it goes deeper than that. After all, Jesus says it affects every aspect of our lives, and so it has to also do with our time and our energy and our compassion and our love and our attention. You see, when we see the world through the lens of scarcity, that there's never enough, we can lose sight of what we do have and refuse to share. And in turn, we miss out on joy. We miss out on the light in our own lives, because instead what happens is we've let our hearts get strangled, and that darkness permeates everything. And we break the very practical, mystical cycle that Jesus keeps coming back to all the time, that if you want to experience life yourself, then love and serve others. That's how it works. And if you and I cut the cycle short, it only leads to more darkness. So in light of all this, here's two simple but profound things that I want to encourage all of us toward, that I think will help put practices in our lives to keep our eyes growing in goodness and ushering more and more light into our own lives in the world. 1, ask yourself on a regular basis, in order to increase my own joy and make the world a more just, equitable, and loving place, What do I have extra of that I can share with someone in need? Just keep that question in front of you. Ask it on a regular basis. And then more importantly, act on it. And then secondly, vocally celebrate when something good happens to someone else. Now, why does this matter in this particular context that we've been talking about this morning? Well, for many of us, because this scarcity type of mindset that what ends up happening is we can look at goodness and joy in the world like a pie, where there are only so many pieces in the world, and if someone else gets a good slice, then that must mean that I'm going to get shorted somehow. I'm going to be missing out. It's been taken from my allotted piece of the pie. And so if something good happens to a friend of yours, and the immediate thought that creeps into your head is something like, well, dang, that must be nice. I mean, I wish I had what they had, or I wish I got to go where they're going. You see, that may seem less obvious, but those jealous or envious reactions come from a scarcity mindset that somehow anything good that happens to them is a potential threat to you. That somehow that good thing that is happening to them is somehow being a taking away from your share of the pie. And what it does is it causes this anxiety in you and I. It starts to fill up our body with this darkness because, again, it's seen as a threat. And so the next time one of your friends is sharing pictures of their vacation or driving up in a new car or getting to attend a special event, or they're sharing some good news, some good success or achievement that came their way or their kids' way, practice simply saying, I'm so thrilled for you. That's so great. I'm so happy for you. Even if you have to kind of force yourself to say it and you don't feel it, it's like, well, I'm not going to say it if I don't feel it. Listen, practice disciplining your heart to see the world through the lens of celebrating the good that happens to others. Because a bad eye sees the world through the lens of scarcity. I'm going to get screwed, and someone else is going to get a bigger slice. Life is just this race, and I got to grind it out. I've got to beat everyone else out, protect what's mine, forget the rest. You see how over time that mindset inevitably leads to filling every ounce of our being with a certain kind of darkness, but instead, try intentionally celebrating the goodness you see happen to others and see if it doesn't start to affect every aspect of your life in a more positive way, in a way filled with light. And as we do, may we discover more and more the truth of what Jesus meant when he said, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And may we find ourselves choosing to see through the lens of generosity and light. And we let that affect our attitudes and our actions regarding money, how we share, how we give, and how we celebrate with others when good comes their way, for our own sake and for the sake of the kind of world that we want to perpetuate. Much love, Crosspointe. See you next week.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspoint.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspoint.org/care. And welcome home.